But yes, welcome everyone to this late night live stream, at least for me in London, and for Larry on, I think you're on the East Coast, aren't you, Larry?
East Coast. So it's 6:25, 6:20.
Okay, have you had dinner yet?
Not yet. It's waiting for me. Got some nice, nice pasta. So pasta and meatballs.
Oh, I had pasta and chicken. Well,
there you go.
Lovely. Well, no, it's lovely to have you back, everyone. We're with the one and only Larry Johnson, ex-CIA analyst and official in the State Department focusing on counterterrorism. And, well, Larry, I think, we were speaking about 5 days ago. I think it was either Sunday or Monday, and it was in the aftermath of the F-15 being shot down, and we were discussing the that the US didn't have, or Israel didn't have, air supremacy. They had superiority, but clearly there were systems, methods that the IRGC could use to shoot stuff down. And now we have a ceasefire, which is, that's really my first question for you, which is it holding? It is being violated, but it seems to be holding between the Iranians and Americans. They do seem intent on the meeting tomorrow. Is that what you would agree with?
If a ceasefire is defined as the United States and Israel not carrying out any more attacks against Iran, then yes, we have a ceasefire. But Iran has made it quite clear that its conditions for agreeing to negotiations and reaching an actual agreement to have a ceasefire is contingent upon Israel stopping its attack on Lebanon and on Hezbollah and on Hamas. Today is the 60th. Today marks the end, if you will, the ceasefire with Hamas. And so if Israel resumes attacks on Hamas, and I saw about an hour ago, they've launched strikes again into southern Lebanon, which means Hezbollah is going to fire off rockets and into Israel, then Iran's position seems pretty firm. They're not going to have. There's nothing further to talk about, because the initial conditions they had set out, that they initially had agreement from the U.S., not just according to Iran, but according to Pakistan, is that it would bring about a ceasefire in Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq, in addition to stop the attacks on Iran. So the U.S. is pushing hard. Oh, yeah, we're moving forward with negotiations, and this is our negotiating team. Iran still hasn't committed to showing up in Islamabad. And Donald Trump, again, just put out another one of his truths, so-called truths, saying that, that if Iran is still charging ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, they better stop now or else. Iran's not going to stop. They made it quite clear. Going forward, there's a new sheriff in town, and the sheriff's called Iran, and Iran is going to collect a duty or a toll off of everybody that comes in. And the United States they're going to have to accept that. That's not open for debate or negotiation.
So as we speak, there are launches happening. Hezbollah has launched a projectile. So it claims, although there's more than one, I think probably, a missile has been fired at the southern coastal city of Ashdod, which was intercepting, according to the IDF. But so I just want to keep that in mind. I might jump in with some breaking news occasionally. But, a couple of things I think to take note of just today. We can work our way back up the week as well. But just today, within the past 2 hours, Trump's losing it. I think he's really losing it, already lost it. With what he's saying, he's attacking, he's attacking allies, he's attacking the Wall Street Journal, and the most crazy one, this mammoth truth, as you call it, attacking Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, all these former, MAGA supporters. He's just going crazy.
Just let me interrupt you. Just a question: has he launched new attacks on them today?
Yeah. In the past, I can read out the whole thing.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that.
No, so I'm not going to read the whole thing because I don't want to give him that amount of time. But for audience members, if you can see that is the length of the truth. That's a long truth. So he basically says, I know why Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones have all seen me fighting for years, especially by the fact that they think it is wonderful for Iran, the #1 state sponsor of terror, to have a nuclear weapon, because they have one thing in common: low IQs. They're stupid people, and they know it, their family know it, and everyone knows it too. He goes on and on and on.
Okay, that's enough. We don't have to indulge his idiocy anymore.
Look,
you can accuse Tucker, and I know Tucker. I mean, we're not, we text back and forth on occasion, and he's. I appeared on a Crossfire show back in, oh my God, 23 years ago when he was a young guy, and he was one of the panelists, interviewing me. But to accuse people like Tucker of being low IQ and stupid, and the same for Candace, I mean, this is demeaning. This is, it really does suggest that he has lost touch with reality, that when people disagree, and they've said nothing about that Iran should have a nuke, it's just the opposite. But, Tucker's coming at it from a place of deep religious conviction that we shouldn't be killing children and women, period.
Yeah, I'm interested as someone who knows that community quite well. Then obviously we can differ on our ideas of what the transatlantic relationship should be. We can disagree on the military operations or to what extent, right, countries can get involved or what their foreign policies should be. But I think most people would agree that Trump's mental state is getting really questionable. In the past 5 days, we've had absolutely insane quantities of tweets, even for him. So I don't know. How do you, as someone who's been in government in the security fields, feel about someone who, as the head of state, is that way inclined to behave?
Yeah, I don't think since the incapacity of Woodrow Wilson more than 100 years ago, that we have had a president as unbalanced and deranged as Donald Trump. Ronald Reagan was showing signs of early Alzheimer's when he was president. And I know people that met with him and talked, and they came away, they were concerned, but Reagan managed to keep it in check. And it was only after he left office that the severity of the symptoms increased. Biden was similarly incapacitated, but not dangerous in the same way that Donald Trump is now dangerous. When
you think he could be number 25, I forget.
Yeah, the 25th Amendment. Yeah, there's an increasing chorus of voices calling for the 25th Amendment. To do that, as I understand the process, because it's never been invoked before, but it would require a majority of the cabinet to line up and say, yes, we think the president is not functioning properly. Now, I could see J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and Tulsi Gabbard coming together to try to see if they could lobby other members of the administration. Howard Lutnick, for example, has been rumored that Trump's mad at him. So Trump has a great way of alienating people, and this is a sign of his brittle mental state. My mother, who has passed now, but let's see, she, like 4 or 5 years ago, she was living with us, and the woman I remembered when I was in my 30s and 40s was not the woman who was living with us. She had become, I'd call it a brittle brain. She would be very, sometimes very sharp, sometimes very unchecked. You've got a social control in your front lobe that times you may think a thought and say, well, but that wouldn't be appropriate in public, or you may want to say something and you say, no, that goes away. And then you say what you think, and so it's unfiltered, and that's where Trump is. Trump is. Yeah, go ahead.
No, is that the prefrontal cortex?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that one? Okay.
Yeah.
And that acts as a barrier, like a hesitation. Oh, okay, I don't know.
And and I've got I have someone that's also close to me that suffered some brain injury early in life, and their that frontal lobe, that frontal cortex, there's lack of social awareness is what I call it, and not that they're a bad person at all. They're a very good and decent person, but that when you lose that control, you don't even read social cues well anymore. And Donald Trump, he's also exhibiting one other sign that's associated with dementia. It's called confabulation. And look, people say, "Hey, Johnson, you're not medically qualified to do this," but I've been, I worked, I worked my way through college as a respiratory therapy tech, so I do have some basic knowledge, but you don't have to be a medical doctor to understand what confabulation is. And confabulation is when you say something that you firmly, genuinely believe is true, but it's not. It's objectively not true. And bless you. An example of that is Donald Trump claiming, I've stopped 8 wars. Oh, no, I've stopped 9 wars. And I was actually interviewed earlier today by 2 different TV stations in India. And they're still rankled over that. Like, what is he talking about? He had nothing to do with this. So, but in his mind, he really believes it and believes it's true and then acts accordingly. So, yeah, he is in serious mental decline, and it's dangerous because of what he's saying. Just as I comment, here's the tweet he put out earlier, or the truth. He said, there are reports that Iran is charging fees to transfer to tankers going through the Hormuz Strait. They better not be, and if they are, they better stop now. Iran has made it clear, we are charging, we're going to continue to charge, and we're going to use that money to rebuild parts of our country that you've destroyed. Non-negotiable.
It's nice to have a slight tangent. I think this is why I do enjoy streaming, especially with you in the past couple of weeks, because we have these unexpected tangents. Like, I think it's interesting. I'm fascinated by psychology and the relationship it has for geopolitics, the relationships of heads of state, that sort of thing. But no, I mean, from my perspective, and everyone, thanks for retweet the stream and like it or whatever. I'm not a YouTuber, natural YouTuber. I'm supposed to say that, right? No, but I think from my perspective, Larry, it's just how quickly things keep changing. Every 20 minutes, there seems to be another post from him, which is just targeting everybody. And it's almost like he's just drunk with a bottle and he's, on his own in the bed, just like drinking it. Like, I've been catching up on 2.5 Men in the past few weeks. And I just feel like he's doing a Charlie Sheen, right? So, it just goes crazy. He just turns to the internet and just unleashes all his anger on the internet. But quips aside then, what do you think about the ceasefire in its actual technicalities? Just for the audience, I'll lay out the groundwork and then I'd love you to break it apart for us. But simply, we've had the 15-point plan from Trump, which was very maximalist, more detailed. And then we had the 10-point proposal in response, which was a lot more vague, but not, I think, deliberately. It was more open-ended, right? The first 3 points were about cessation of hostilities across the Middle East. 4 and 5 are about the Strait. 6, 7, 8 are more about nuclear power or the access of frozen assets and sanctions relief. And then 9 and 10, I think, are related as well. The point is that they're quite different. and there was a lot of confusion over which one was being used as the framework. Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, actually, I think you may be looking at that 10-point presentation by Iran. These were not like an opening bid. Let's say you're going to go buy a car, and the price tag says, it's $45,000, and you go, I'll be willing to, I'll pay $42,000, and then you get into a haggling back and forth. That's not this. When they say U.S. commitment to non-aggression, that means that the United States and Israel will not launch further attacks on Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. They were very specific about that. That's not open for negotiation. That is an Iranian demand that the West must accept if they want to talk about a ceasefire. The second demand, or a non-negotiable demand, is Iran's going to continue to control the Strait of Hormuz. It will retain the sovereignty and coordinate maritime traffic through the strait with a regulated or secure transit protocol. And then 3, that the United States will accept that Iran has rights to nuclear enrichment, period. Not open for discussion about eliminating it. They can talk about at what level they might enrich to. That is similar to the kind of agreement Iran made during the JCPOA. 4th, lifting all primary U.S. sanctions on Iran. Again, we're not going to sit, Iran's not going to go in and negotiate, say, okay, we'll talk about this, like when you're going to lift the sanctions. No, because Iran has already done that. When they signed on to the JCPOA, they agreed to inspections, which they allowed. They remained a member of the NPT, and they agreed to limit enrichment at a certain level. And in exchange, the sanctions that the United States and Europe and others had imposed upon them were supposed to be removed. Well, they signed the agreement, and what happened? They didn't remove the sanctions. The sanctions remained in place. And then Donald Trump tears up the agreement 2 years later. So this time they're going in and saying, if you want to have a negotiation about a ceasefire, you got to lift the primary sanctions before we actually are able to negotiate a ceasefire. And they insisted also lift the secondary sanctions that are in effect, terminate all UN Security Council resolutions against Iran, terminate all IAEA Board of Governors resolutions against Iran, pay compensation, war reparations. That, again, that's not for negotiation. That's a demand. That must be in place. Then release all frozen Iranian assets, and then U.S. military withdrawal from the Middle East. Now, some have looked at that as if these are 10 items that will be on the list to discuss, with the wrong belief, that these are things that Iran is willing to make concessions on. No, this is the same mistake that the West has made with respect to Russia and Ukraine in those negotiations. Vladimir Putin, on June 14th of 2024, speaking to the foreign ministry, laid out in explicit detail what must happen before there would be any attempt to negotiate an end to the war. And, one of those is now the recognition that Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, that those are now permanent parts of Russia. That's not to be negotiated on. They're not going to negotiate on where a line of contact should stop. And the West consistently ignored what Russia was saying. So what I'm saying is we got the same phenomena going on here. The West is pretending that Iran never really said these things and didn't mean them. Okay, so if the meeting comes off, and that's in question, because Iran just released a statement a little bit ago saying, hey, when we submitted our 10 points, one of those points was to stop the attacks on Lebanon and Hezbollah. And that's non-negotiable. So far, Israel immediately went out and launched the largest attack ever on Lebanon in order to destroy the negotiations. And Iran was ready to retaliate last night. Both Pakistan and the Chinese intervened, and they convinced Iran, saying, look, keep your powder dry, hold on, we're going to see if we can get this under control. And for much of today, the attacks stopped on Lebanon. And so Iran said, okay, we can move forward. But now in the last couple hours, Israel's bombing again in southern Lebanon. So the back and forth between Lebanon and Hezbollah on the one hand and Israel on the other is going to continue.
Yeah, it's I want to come to Lebanon explicitly in a moment. We had an interesting conversation with David Dowd of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's quite hawkish. The FDD is pretty hawkish on Israel and Iran, but he certainly knew his history, shall we say, or the complexity around it. But one thing I'm interested from your perspective, Larry, is, how much do you think that Trump wanted this ceasefire and therefore just completely ignored Israel? Because they were cut out.
Right.
But clearly Netanyahu wasn't very happy about that. But at the same time, Israel doesn't have much of a choice to stop attacking Iran, because they do need the United States and its $4 billion worth of defense provisions. So what do you think what was the psyche on the US administration side?
Yeah, I'm not sure that Trump made that original call. I'm not sure he even read the 10-point plan and understood it. I think that decision was made by Susie Wiles as chief of staff. And they wrongly calculated that they could agree to this and it would put sufficient pressure on Israel to stop. And it had just the opposite effect. When the news of this deal came out last night, oh my God, there was a meltdown on the Zionist side, both in Israel and in the United States. Mark Levin, in particular, he was dumbstruck. He's yelling and screaming. He wasn't yelling and screaming. He was just like he couldn't believe what he was reading, and that's where the Israelis as well realized they had been cut out. And so they sent a message by that massive attack on Wednesday. So they got this news late Tuesday. Then they responded by trying to, bomb Lebanon back into the Stone Age. And then today, I'm not sure what was said by whom, but Israel appears to have pulled back and stopped the attacks up into main Lebanon anyway. There are some rumors that Israel and Lebanon prefer to negotiate direct, and this will involve getting rid of Hezbollah. Good luck with that. That's not going to happen. We were already told that they destroyed Hezbollah. They killed Nasrallah, killed senior leaders, assassinated them, and then set off all the pagers and cell phones blowing up and killing a variety, a fairly significant number of Hezbollah leaders. And here we are, 2 years later, with Hezbollah just, destroying a significant number of Israeli tanks. I mean, well over 100 now. And when you realize that each of those tanks has a crew of 4, let's be conservative and say for every 2 crewmen per tank. So you've got at least 100, 200 casualties out of that. It could be upwards of 400 or more. So, and that's killed and wounded. But this is, you're too young to remember, as I do, the 2006 incursion by Israel. The same famous baseball player who was known for his odd comments, Yogi Berra, he said, it's deja vu all over again. Well, yes, it is. Israel invaded in southern Lebanon, trying to reach the Litani River in 2006. And at that time, Hezbollah had built an extensive system of bunkers and ambush points, and they inflicted significant damage on the Israelis. And after about 4 weeks, they pulled back. They retreated. They recognized they weren't going to be able to move forward. Well, that's happening now, but it's different in that now Hezbollah is using fiber optic drones in addition to RPGs and modified artillery and rockets.
So that's actually something that and I've just posted it in the chat for anyone who's interested to watch it. But that was one of the things that David was sharing, which was sort of what are the objectives of Israel in this regard then over Hezbollah, because they did set them back significantly with that pager attack, which took out Nasrallah and dismantled some of the senior system, leadership. But the system still existed, right? It's the same.
So let me ask you a question. What's the evidence that it significantly set them back?
Well, the Israelis claim that because they took out the head of the snake.
Yeah, that's The Israelis claim that it significantly set them back. Now, I was saying at the time, and they were saying the same thing. Once they got rid of Bashar al-Assad, Hamas, Hezbollah was dead. They would have no way to resupply. It's like, guys, you realize those smuggling routes that cross the Levant, that go from Lebanon, Syria, going east through Iraq, going through Saudi Arabia, going through Iran, going all the way to China. Those have existed for about 3,000 years. So you got tribes all along there that control those routes. So, instead of armaments being flown into Damascus, they were being smuggled along that rat line. And Israel couldn't stop it. So I think Israel, once again, as is its nature, grossly underestimated the capability and potency of Hezbollah.
No, I agree. I'm just simply trying to frame that the messaging was that they had achieved a significant undermining of the Hezbollah system, much like they took out a significant number of the leadership of the political of the Islamic Republic on February 28th.
Right.
They also dealt a significant blow. Again, I'm role playing here by taking out Nasrallah and some of the ideological figures. Problem with that is you didn't do a good enough job of removing other elements of the system. Right. In the case of the Islamic Republic, the judicial system still exists, the military infrastructure still works, the security forces, they're all still there. So Hezbollah as a network, as a system, as a machine, still operates. And to your point, tunnels, networks, all that still work. And even in Gaza, when it was claimed that they had dealt massive setbacks to Hamas, how many tunnels were found to still be existing in parts of the Strip? So the emphasis in this regard was apparently the IDF are trying to go after middle rank officers, but only but across Lebanon, or across the east, because that's where the Shia Muslims are located and Hezbollah strongholds are, but also in the south.
Right.
And I'll pass it to you in just a moment. But all I'm saying is that in the south, under the Libani River, that's where the Israelis were physically going to occupy and focus their military efforts. But can they therefore deal a significant blow to Hezbollah if they're not going to be targeting the northeast part of Lebanon as well? So it seems to me that their operation isn't going to go far enough if they're trying to achieve some of these objectives.
Well, the first problem we have is the Israeli army is not a very good army. It is poorly led, poorly trained, and undisciplined. We see that time and time again. An army, and consider the fact of their inability to defeat Hamas despite having every conceivable military advantage a military force could have. They surround Gaza, which is 5 miles wide and 25 miles long, roughly. Hamas has no means of resupply. They don't have a contingent. If they do, it's not being detected. It's being smuggled in somehow. Hamas only has rifles, some sniper rifles, some machine guns, some RPGs, but they don't have artillery. They don't have tanks. They don't have armored personnel carriers. They certainly don't have an air force. They don't have helicopters, and they don't have the kind of advanced intelligence from satellites and et cetera that the Israelis do. And in spite of all of that, Israel has failed to defeat Hamas, to force it out, when you had the uprising among the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto back in 1943, they fought the Wehrmacht for a month, but ultimately the Wehrmacht kept moving in, crushing, compressing, and finally destroying them. Israel won't do that, can't do that. One, because basically they're cowards, and secondly, they're afraid of casualties, because they realize how small they are as as a military force. And that's why they opted for bombing and flattening the entire thing to, indiscriminately kill women, children, elderly. It didn't matter. But now they've done the classic mistake that, Adolf Hitler did, divided his forces. General Custer did, divided his forces, trying to fight in 2 different fronts, 3 different fronts. So now they're fighting in Hamas. They're in the West Bank. They're fighting, or in Gaza. They're fighting in the West Bank against the Palestinian inhabitants there. They're now fighting in southern Lebanon, and they've now also picked a fight with Iran. And Iran is in a position to retaliate in a very strong way. So, they've got even if they advance to the Litani, let's give them that. They get to the Litani River, and in theory, they've created a buffer zone. The missiles, rockets that Hezbollah is firing still go way into Israel. So that buffer zone does not actually buy them security.
So just to continue on this theme for a second, a lot of people will argue, at least from the Western perspective or US-Israeli camps will emphasize that the IDF, the Israeli military, is forward-thinking because they often use the idea of preemptive strikes. I'm sure you've heard of the concept of roof knocking, right? You warn the recipient, whatever, the civilians, that you're about to strike your building. So we're going to knock you with a dud projectile to give you time to escape or evacuate before we explode it. Other areas of international humanitarian law where the Israelis claim to be pushing the boundaries and modernizing it. But in this case, I just want to give some statistics for people as of today. So 300 plus people have now been killed in strikes on Beirut, and over 200 people have been killed, 250 people have been killed in the Bekaa Valley. I think it was yesterday or earlier today, and 1,100 people injured. Those are the highest rates of injury and maiming from this conflict since the full onslaught of exchanges a year and a half ago, and certainly of the war. So that doesn't strike me as being very refined in your military craft, Larry.
Correct. Well, yeah, very, very true. And again, part of the big reason for the incompetence of the Israeli military is they do not have a career set of non-commissioned officers. Non-commissioned officers are senior sergeants, from first sergeant to staff sergeant to you got several classes of sergeants, but all of these are people who have been in the military for at least 6 years, and sometimes longer. They are very experienced individuals, and invariably, when you get a new lieutenant fresh out of West Point, the kid's 22, maybe 23, and they're put in charge of, maybe they'll initially be put in charge of a platoon, and they have to learn how to start leading those men. Well, they're assigned to, like, a first sergeant, for example. The first sergeant is a guy that's 30 years old. And, think back in your own life, what you knew when you were 21 and what you knew when you were 30. You grew up some, and you realize, you were making better decisions and you had a better understanding of the world. Yeah, no, come on. So what you have in the Israeli army is you get 22-year-old first lieutenant, a lieutenant, or actually a 22-year-old captain with a 23-year-old first sergeant. What that tells you is neither of them can find their ass with both hands if you stapled their hands to their ass. They have no experience. And that's the problem with the leadership in the Israeli army. It's modeled, unfortunately, after what the Soviets used to do. And the Russians still do to a lesser extent. I mean, that's been a hindrance and a limitation on the Russian army. But the Israelis are very, very poor at executing it like this. And so without that kind of senior leadership, seasoned leadership to say, hey, we shouldn't do that.
Well, the claim is, or some people will argue, because the Israelis are going up against asymmetrical forces, right? They're not going up against a conventional nation-state army. They're going up against militia groups. They're going up against non-state entities, which are very decentralized, and therefore it's difficult to judge how effective they are as an armed force in a conventional kinetic conflict. Do you think that is largely the case here? How would the IDF fare if they actually did fight a land war against Iran, for example?
Well, again, that's I think that's an excuse. And if they tried to find a land war against Iran, they'd be crushed. They would lose quickly. We have a modern example of a country fighting an asymmetric war and winning decisively. And that was Russia with the 10-year Chechen War. It started, funded by the West, with extremists trained by the West in 1999, August to be precise. And it continued for about till 2009, 2010. And it was a brutal war. But at the end of that war, Russia had crushed this Islamic uprising, but did it in a way that today you have Chechen battalions in the Russian army that are, they're known for their courage and their patriotism. Mm-hmm. So they will go into battle shouting Allahu Akbar, but their love for Mother Russia is such that it is profound. I've met with one of the heroes of Russia. I mean, it's a legitimate, it's a title like the Congressional Medal of Honor, General Abdi Aludinov. He's from Grozny, which was the heart of those battles, and he lost family members in those battles. But Russia showed, no, you could, with proper tactics and good leadership, which the Russians fortunately have had very good leadership, despite not having an NCO corps institutionalized. But and today, that problem of sectarian violence, the asymmetry of it, has disappeared. It's not a problem there. So it is possible to solve that. Israel's just bad at solving it. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, the Chechen Wars is very vivid for me because it was when I was my father had just moved from Moscow in the 1991. I was growing up in the late 90s, whatever, as a kid, and Chechnya was also the first demonstration of Putin as head of state, and the willingness of the Russians to use pretty brutalist tactics. Yeah. Right, they crushed them. There was no sort of restriction or restraint in how they dealt with the whatever separatists or terrorists or disruptors, whatever word framing people will use. So in this regard, then, if Israel is just going to continue to largely just aerial strike Lebanon,
right?
Where does that leave Lebanon?
Well, it leaves what it means. Lebanon is going to continue to be divided. Look, Hezbollah exists because of the previous Israeli invasions. Israeli incursions in the early 1980s led to Hezbollah coming together and forming to fight under a religious banner. You had another Shia group that was more active, preceded them by 10 years, Amal. But Israel's constant attacks on Lebanon over the last, 46 years has not brought peace at all to northern Israel at all. And these attacks on the Christians, because remember the large part of Lebanese population are Christians; they're not Muslims. Mm-hmm. But these guys, so attacking the Christians like this further rallies. It actually brings the Muslims and Christians together in a common cause. And Israel has, Netanyahu is such a monster. Yeah, and just his arrogance. I think he may outdo Trump in terms of arrogance and hubris. But his decision on Easter to close the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's like, really? That church hasn't been closed in centuries. And yet here is Netanyahu. Basically, it's persecuting Christians. And that did have an effect, was that spread among a number of Christians, and it further sours people on Israel. You know, at a time when Israel would try to build support, it is alienating previous supporters.
Well, no, I mean, regardless of where you sit in the political spectrum, unless you're an ultra nationalist, I think in Israel, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, I think, are some of the most unpalatable people I can imagine. But I'm also by trade a demographer, and I find the population composition of Lebanon very fascinating because it's one of the most multi-ethnic, multi-religious,
Correct.
not just of the Middle East, but of the world, despite how small the population is, 5.8 million. And this is the thing I think is so the most saddening about it is of the population size. In this conflict of the past 6-7 weeks, 1,500, now 2,000 plus Lebanese have been killed versus 3.5, nearly 4,000 in Iran. But Iran's 93 million. So as a percentage of the population, it's insanely big. And what I'm curious from your perspective on this is sort of, you know, the Israelis' claim or emphasis is that they are doing this because the Lebanese government have failed to dismember Hezbollah, which I find a bit unfair, given there hasn't really been an operational government in Lebanon since past 5 years, 6 years.
Going back farther than that. That is. Hezbollah exists because of what Israel has done to the Shia population. It's that simple.
Right.
And they are not, even though they're portrayed as fanatics, you find that they are actually very pragmatic. They, you know, the history of Hezbollah in its early days, they carried out some suicide bombings, but then they became very focused. And subsequent to that, they largely confined themselves to attacking military and political targets. I mean, not just civilians, but going after people who were in decision-making positions or commanded units or locations where troops were located. Now, people don't like being attacked, but that's quite different from the ideology we saw driving Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which they very much had an exclusive religious view about who was authorized to be a Muslim and how to deal with Christians and Jews. It was really, as many Islamic scholars describe it, as an un-Islamic view. Mm-hmm. That kind of extremism to invoke that kind of Sharia law was seen as really violating the tenets of Islam. So Hezbollah it's not going away. And so at some point, the government is going to, I think, have to recognize they don't have enough strength, military strength, to destroy Hezbollah. And Hezbollah right now, I imagine they're actually attracting recruits as a result of the bombings by Israel. Those bombings, instead of crushing the spirits of people, tend to awaken a rage inside and a desire for retribution, retaliation.
Well, this is why I think that the situation with Iran, just to bring that element back in, is so insane. You know, we can argue whether or not the Iranian government was ideal for Iran or whether the Iranian people would have liked something else. But quite clearly, there was a large proportion of people that they were largely indifferent, right? They didn't want to go to a monarchy or something necessarily. They wanted just an improvement in the current system as it existed, right?
Right.
There was a set of polls done before the 2024 election after Raisi was killed and Pezeshkian won in May, I think it was. It's almost 2 years ago. And you look at some of the polls, and the main grievances weren't like change the government or replace it with a completely new political system. It was, we just want less corruption, better economic stability, better rights for some women, you know, social, pretty conventional things that any country would really.
Was that survey, was that the one done by the University of Maryland?
I'm not sure.
Because they had a couple of surveys that were done in 2024 that are relevant to what's happened. I think The one you're citing was done by University of Maryland, making telephone calls, sort of the old-fashioned way. Then there was this group. It's run by an Iranian dissident professor that lives in the Netherlands, and he teamed up with a group running a VPN out of Canada.
Wow.
And they conducted a survey, and their survey found that 80% of the Iranians wanted to get rid of the Islamic Republic. Well, when I dug into it to see who was funding it, USAID, National Endowment for the Democracy, essentially CIA front groups. I mean, the CIA funnels money through them where they can do it through groups like that, work on regime change by creating false results. Because this poll was done over computers. And so they could claim that they had talked to all these people on computers. When I heard that, it reminded me of, oh my goodness, several about 30 years ago, my then 10-year-old niece came to live with us along with her brother. The parents were divorced, and so my wife and I became the temporary caregivers. And one day I came home, and she was there with another girlfriend. They were now 12, and they were giggling and laughing. I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Well, we've been chatting with this 26-year-old man online, and he thinks we're 20-year-olds." And I said, "Really?" I said, "How do you know he's 26 years old?" "Because he said so." I went, "Huh. And it seems to me that you two are saying that you're 20 years old, but you're not. So what you don't know who's on the other edge." I said, "You don't even know if it's a real guy." So that's why I said this was to get a computer-generated survey that shows, oh, yeah, 80% of the Iranians can't wait to rise up and overthrow the Ayatollah. Nonsense. And that was what was used to sell Trump on going to war with Iran.
Wow. Yeah, no, a lot of crazy stuff there for sure. And I think that the front system, it's very interesting how some organizations are used as vehicles for other agendas or interests, Larry. But I just looked it up here. The one I'm talking about is from an institute called the Middle East now that I want to the Middle East Institute, MEI.
Yeah. I mean, those results sounded legit.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, I wasn't challenging those results at all.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and see, but here's the other argument that the West tries to make. Oh, the Iranian people are so dissatisfied because of their economic conditions. Yeah, why are they in such a bad shape economic? Could it have anything to do with the sanctions that the United States and Europe have been repeatedly imposing upon Iran? Maybe, just maybe. So that's where we set the house on fire, and then we complain about that they didn't have enough fire protection.
Yeah, I've interviewed and had relationships with people, some of which have worked or been on the peripheries of things like the JCPOA negotiations. And I've vacillated on whether it was a good deal or not. I mean, obviously it could have gone further or there were limitations, but at the time there seemed to be compliance by the Islamic Republic, and it was Donald Trump who seems to be doing an incredible job of bringing far left groups, far right groups, the center, all together to literally just be like, we're anti-Trump. Incredible work.
Yeah.
The one unifying figure around the world is one orange-tarted orangutan. But I guess, what's your opinion on the JCPOA? And if these talks go anywhere, is Trump just literally going to regurgitate the JCPOA, but with a new term?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. That if the negotiations proceed, they will come out with what I call JCPOA light. Only this one will be not. They won't have to wait for sanctions to be lifted. They will be lifted before that happens. And Iran was more than willing to make that deal back then. The original JCPOA was actually, it was a good deal. It just enraged the Israelis because it was taking away their excuse for rallying world support, because we got to destroy Iran because they're going to get a nuke. Well, if JCPOA is moving forward and is properly monitored, that argument falls apart. They're not building a nuke. So that was.
No, I agree. Look, the neocons, the right wing stream of the US government or communities, and some people on the far left were very critical of it. But it was working, and we saw what happened to enrichment. We saw what happened also to your point about the economy. What happened as soon as those multilateral sanctions, the UN sanctions, the US sanctions, some EU sanctions, all came off. There was a huge surge back up in Iranian economy and activity and the quality of living for so many Iranians. So the reason I mentioned all this originally was because it's what you said about Lebanon. You're not going to win a population round by bombing them or targeting them indiscriminately or arbitrarily, as seems to be the case in some war zones. In some cases, I think that the war in Iran by the United States and Israel has galvanized more Iranians to be like, well, we kind of support the government again.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
So, where does this go from here? As I guess I'll put it to you as we're entering reaching the last.
Well, the United States is going to discover that it has limited power, and it's unable to defeat Iran, and that victory that will be just a de facto victory by Iran, not a formal surrender by the United States or anything, but this is going to accelerate, I believe, the development of BRICS and the emergence of this alternative financial market. That the U.S. attempt to bully people and coerce them, threaten them. We're going to cut you off from SWIFT. We're going to seize your money. If your money's in our banks, we're going to seize it. All of a sudden, that's backfiring. Because a number of countries, we saw France the other day, it stored $29 billion worth of gold in the United States. And they said, we'll take care of it in Paris, because they don't want to run the risk of the United States seizing it and saying, oh, we're going to hold this because we think you're a bad country. And you find that with Russia and China, you've got a completely different attitude. The Chinese are not trying to dictate to everybody else, hey, you got to live like us, the Chinese. You got to do what we do. No. They're just the opposite. And, Deutsche Bank, I think we may have talked about this last time. They're issuing panda bonds now. And when it comes to dealing with diversity of ethnic groups, Russia's got 145, I believe is the right number, maybe higher, 145 different ethnic groups with different languages, different cultural traditions, but they've managed to bring them all together as Russians, as the motherland. So that's where I think Russia actually has something to teach the world about how to deal with diversity. And it is the Russian mindset that I encountered in I made 7 trips, conducted a lot of interviews, and the probably the most insightful one came from Vyacheslav Fetisov. Slava. He was the first or second Russian hockey star to go to play in the United States. In Russian hockey, he's like the Michael Jordan. As Michael Jordan is the basketball, Fetisov is that to hockey. But he described coming to the States and encountering, he said he was used to a mindset and an approach to playing hockey that involved a team, that you played for each other, that you had a collaborative mindset at the outset. Whereas he says he found in the United States, it was much more individual. What can I do as the star? Not how can I help the team? And, there's that mindset, I think, is needed in the world. It is that kind of mindset that brings healing, not division.
Very pertinent. I mean, being half Russian, half English, it's a weird experience because I grew up mainly in the West, but I've been to Russia many times. I did spend several summers there with my grandparents in a place called Akadem Gorodok, which is Russian for Academy Town. And it was established by the Soviets just on the outsides of Novosibirsk, which is the 3rd largest city in southern central Siberia, about I don't know, a couple hundred kilometers, which in Russian terms is next door, just down the road from Kazakhstan. So it's the Russian psyche is very different, and I do think there's a bit of a demonization of the country, especially in
absolutely,
the Anglo-Saxon world. Like the French continental Europeans don't necessarily have quite as an antipathy. I do have my problems with Putin. I'm not a fan of his, if I'm honest, but I think that Russia as a country is often misunderstood. But that's what I want to talk with you on Sunday, is explore the NATO-Russia dynamics in more detail. But the last question I just have for you very simply is, what do you think we should look out for in the next couple of days over the negotiations as these peace talks start? Are they just going to fall apart, or do you think they will go somewhere and it's mainly about how Israel will disrupt them, or they will derail because of the actions in Lebanon?
We won't know until Saturday, and to look for the sign that there's hope that this could turn into something productive will be if the Iranian delegation does arrive in Islamabad and the talks open, and they all open face to face.
Right.
That J.D. Vance is in the same room with Arachi. If that doesn't happen, then this war is going to rekindle, and it is going to expand, and Iran will proceed to finish off the Gulf Arabs. They're going to be forced to make a choice. You're going to be either with us, Iran, or we're going to destroy you. That's simple. And Israel will find itself in more trouble. The United States, despite all of Trump's threats, etc., has limited power now. We are in the process of exhausting a wide array of armaments.
Well, that's a precarious point to note on, Larry, but thank you so much for your time. I really wish we could continue talking, but somehow an hour has gone by.
Yeah.
You have your spaghetti and meatballs to get to, and I have bed and a glass of water to get to, and a glass of wine, actually. But everyone, thank you so much. Do follow Larry if you've got a Telegram channel. Is that right?
I do it. Telegram, Sonar21, and sonar21.com on my blog.
So. Okay, yeah. So be sure to check those out, everyone. And if you enjoyed the stream, then do subscribe, and of course, join us again on Sunday, probably 5 p.m. I think you said, Larry, right?
Yeah, 5 p.m. on Sunday. Yeah.
We'll see you there, everyone. Thanks so much for your time, and stay safe out there.
All right, my friend. Have a good evening. Good night.